Well, good morning there to Borowski. There is a specter haunting the West, thrones and parliaments, heads of state and crowned heads, looking easily over their shoulders at a shadow looming ever closer at their back. What's the sinister phantom that has them peeking from under the covers? Communism? Man, don't be so 20th century. Terrorism? Well, the Western world is still the most terror-free zone on the planet, though the softer the skin, the more pain it feels. No, this new threat is the rise of Islam. Now that communism no longer threatens the Western financial system, now that the West can give up its myth of the international Jewish conspiracy, conveniently since Hitler removed its human base, old enemies have been removed from the museum and dusted off for duty as new hate magnets. Emmanuel Goldstein, George Orwell's fictionalized version of Leon Trotsky, was replaced by Osama bin Laden, who, like the real Trotsky, had to be off as proof that the struggle against terror and fascism was succeeding. Now, as a secular person, I am not moved by Islam one way or another. I don't believe in its faith. I don't care for arguments as to which faith is better for humanity any more than I care how many angels dance on the point of a safety pin. Justice, freedom, human rights, rights for women, minorities, gays have been ill-served by all the world's major religions, and Islam is responsible for its share of inhumanity and injustice in that regard. But I also feel no need to go on the jihad against it, to single it out as some unique menace to humanity, while allowing a free pass to fundamentalist Christian leaders with their fingers on nuclear trigger buttons, or to Jewish fundamentalists who will see the whole world reduced to radioactive waste before they surrender an inch of their holy land, is to engage in typical faith-based double standards. Islam would not be a problem in the West, were it not for a number of related reasons. First, you cannot have a global economy and hide behind your iron curtain of cultural purity. The West wants to reap the benefits of globalism, but not share the burdens. These all have to be one-sided, of course, according to the rules of Western elites, in the form of colonialism, which continues in various guises as control of the fuel resources of predominantly Muslim countries. There is also the a priori commitment to Israel, buying the argument that any opposition to Israel's colonial expansion is a threat to its existence. And by no means last, the issue of immigration, fueled by the desire for cheap labor, exploiting a reservoir of ex-colonial labor to take out the garbage, drive the taxis, serve the food, clean the floors, assemble the toys, and build the subdivision tract homes of the modern, liberated, post-colonial Western citizen. You don't want the threat of Sharia law in Britain and the continent? Then you should have thought of that before importing guest workers, because you were too goddamn cheap to pay labor a decent wage. The same with those crying over immigration in the U.S., and the Muslim bashers are no less bigoted toward immigrant Christian Europeans from the wrong side of the continental tracks, like Poles and other East Europeans who found their way west. Funny, too, to see yesterday's victims of bigotry now laid on the new batch of foreigners. Let's see how your precious holy faith was received by the free democratic West when your funny-looking smelly forebears landed here. Reading from Gustavus Meyer's History of Bigotry in the United States, here's the Reverend James B. Dunn of Boston, writing in the American Patriot, the organ of the American Protective Association in 1894. And I quote, "In view of such declarations and teachings, we ask, can a good Romanist be at the same time a loyal American citizen? The Vatican claims absolute and supreme authority in all things, civil as well as spiritual, and every member of that church is bound to render to the pontiff absolute and unquestioning obedience. This being true, is it not quite certain that whatever his personal opinions and feelings may be as an American citizen, he must support the church against the state? Can any person who is loyal to Romanism be true to republicanism? Can a Romanist be a good citizen of America? The United States Supreme Court has decided that the law disfranchising Mormons is constitutional on the theory that the men who take the oath the Mormons are required to take cannot be good citizens. Why should not this principle be applied to those who confess allegiance to the papal hierarchy? How much longer will this flagrant violation of citizenship be permitted in America? Romanism is a political system. As a political power it must be met. No ballot for the man who takes his politics from the Vatican." Now, granted that the average Westerner did not make the bed he's required to lay it. That was decided by political and economic elites. But while Western labor has been underbid by immigrants, the economic lever of global capitalism, for centuries, the West in general has always benefited greatly from them. The majority of these immigrants have always wanted to become part of the societies in which they live. And as usual, it's their hosts who are more resistant to this than they are. The way out of this impasse is obvious, because it has worked so well in the past and can in the present, because Western society does offer an out from entrenched vested identity that makes these problems so intractable, as in Yugoslavia, or Israel, or Sudan, or other scenes of crimes against humanity, and that is, extend citizenship, truly separate religion and state. But that's the very thing most of the complainers and whiners do not want to do. Your only alternate scenario is for you to follow your Iron Curtain down the road of People's Bulgaria, a description of which I have here, from the U.S. government country guide of the same, the old version, and I quote, "In 1878, Turks outnumbered Bulgarians in Bulgaria, but they began emigrating to Turkey immediately after independence was established. The movement continued. The biggest wave of Turkish emigration occurred in 1989, however, when 310,000 Turks left Bulgaria as a result of the Zhivkov regime's assimilation campaign. That program, which began in 1984, forced all Turks and other Muslims in Bulgaria to adopt Bulgarian, Christian, or traditional Slavic names and renounce all Muslim customs. Bulgaria no longer recognized the Turks as a national minority, explaining that all the Muslims in Bulgaria were descended from Bulgarians who had been forced into the Islamic faith by the Ottoman Turks. The Muslims would therefore voluntarily take new names as part of the rebirth process." Interesting that a Marxist-Leninist state would talk about being born again, but that's bigotry for you, by which they would reclaim their Bulgarian identities. During the height of the assimilation campaign, the Turkish government claimed that 1.5 million Turks resided in Bulgaria, while the Bulgarians claimed there were none. In 1986, Amnesty International estimated that 900,000 ethnic Turks were living in Bulgaria. The motivation of the 1984 assimilation campaign was unclear, however. Many experts believed that the disproportion between the birth rates of the Turks and the Bulgarians was a major factor. The birth rate for Turks was about 2% at the time of the campaign, while the Bulgarian rate was barely above zero. The upcoming 1985 census would have revealed this disparity, which could have been construed as a failure of Zhivkov government policy. On the other hand, although most Turks worked in low-prestige jobs such as agriculture and construction, they provided critical labor to many segments of the Bulgarian economy. The emigration affected the harvest season of 1989, when Bulgarians from all walks of life were recruited as agricultural laborers to replace the missing Turks. The shortage was especially acute in tobacco, one of Bulgaria's most profitable exports, and wheat. During the name-changing phase of the campaign, Turkish towns and villages were surrounded by army units. Citizens were issued new identity cards with Bulgarian names. Failure to present a new card meant forfeiture of salary, pension payments, and bank withdrawals. Birth or marriage certificates would be issued only in Bulgarian names. Traditional Turkish costumes were banned, homes were searched, and all signs of Turkish identity removed. Mosques were closed. According to estimates, 500 to 1,500 people were killed when they resisted assimilation measures, and thousands of others went to labor camps or were forcibly resettled. I'll be charitable and say those statistics may be a little off, as of course Western analysts and enumerators were notoriously liberal in applying atrocity standards to Eastern Europe. But regardless, People's Bulgaria as the role model of the Western world in preserving its heritage and culture, I find to be just a little bit, well, predictable. But Azov, isn't radicalism growing in Europe? Fueled by people who won't listen to reason, including all these nice ones you've given here? Well, ultimately, I'm not swayed by that argument for two reasons. Two, count them, two. First, as I said, those using it are precisely those least inclined to be reasonable themselves toward Muslim minorities, who feel the bitterness among Muslim immigrants that leads to rejection rather than coexistence. And because whipping up anti-Muslim hatred is a nice pretext for continued plunder of fossil fuel reserves, though in the past year we've seen a nice twist on this. The very politicians who've led the pack in demonizing the Islamic threat to Europe now want to liberate the poor oppressed people of Libya from a secular dictator whom they praised in the past for suppressing Islamic extremism and keeping their oil drug flowing. This is just a veiled return to the old colonial pattern, showing an honest public face as something Western leaders will never require themselves. Along with ensuring the oil supply into the soil of Islam and ensuring it flows the right way, there is also Israel. That's a whole other video, but it's relevant here to say that giving Israel a perpetual blank check to sow dragon's teeth in the region, and then frowning at Israel for cashing in on it, is typical Western banker hypocrisy. Just like the crisis involving domestic real estate, adopting the Israeli attitude toward the Islamic world is going to get you exactly that, turning the Middle East into one big Gaza. If this is the best the West can do for all its science and philosophy and arts of government, it shows the rest of the planet that the Western cultural inheritance is just a put-on. Like socialism, the people of Bulgaria totally Zhivkov. Uh-oh. Who's knocking upon my line now? Hello? Hey, Ayatollah Khomeini. You've been showing Brother Osama around, taking him around the Virgin Market of Paradise for the best buys of the summer? 2 for 1 in Iraq, huh? Well, thank the U.S. occupation for that. Anyway, what's up? What can we do for you this morning? You just wanted to say that without the Western Islamophobes, your followers would have been out of a job long ago. Okay. The greatest threat to Islamic fundamentalist violence is democracy, human rights, and equality before the law, as well as the rights of labor? Well, don't worry. The West is run by people who don't believe any of that crap, any more than you two ever did.